God calls us to awaken in Him, how will He find us?
Awake and ready. And when He asks us to dedicate our lives more perfectly, how will He find us?
Awake and ready.
Let's pray together. Heavenly Father,
Heavenly Father,
Divine Mother,
Divine Mother,
Friend, beloved God,
Friend, beloved God,
Great Masters,
Great Masters,
Jesus Christ,
Jesus Christ,
Babaji Krishna,
Babaji Krishna,
Lahiri Mahashaya,
Lahiri Mahashaya,
Swami Sri Yukteswar,
Swami Sri Yukteswar,
beloved Guru,
beloved Guru,
Paramahansa Yoganandaji,
Paramahansa Yoganandaji,
saints of all religions,
saints of all religions,
we humbly bow to you.
we humbly bow to you all.
Beloved Lord,
Beloved Lord,
help us in our quest
help us in our quest
to reunite with Thee.
to reunite with Thee.
Remove all the veils
Remove all the veils
that keep us from seeing Thee,
that keep us from seeing Thee,
from seeing our own true self.
from seeing our own true self.
We are Thine.
We are Thine.
Be Thou.
Be Thou ours.
Om.
Om.
Please be seated and chant.
Lord Most High, our Heavenly Father, all our lives we dedicate to Thee. All our labors, all our joys and woes, all our pleasure, all our melody. Make us each a channel of Thy peace. When in darkness, guide us from above. Where there's sorrow, may we sow Thy joy. Where there's hatred, may we share Thy love. Lord Most High, our Heavenly Father, all our lives we dedicate to Thee. All our labors, all our joys and woes, all our pleasure, all our melody. Make us each a channel of Thy peace. When in darkness, guide us from above. Where there's sorrow, may we sow Thy joy. Where there's hatred, may we share Thy love.
Please continue meditating as we read these words from Affirmations for Self-Healing by Swami Ananda. And our topic this week is a beautiful one: humility. Humility is not self-deprecation. It is self-forgetfulness. It is the knowing that God alone is the doer. It is the realization that nothing in this shadow world of appearances is all that important, except as it draws us closer to the Lord. Never tell yourself that you are sinful or weak or incompetent or lazy, except as such a statement may help you to surrender joyfully to God's power. Then live by that power. Never wear the mask of false humility. Humility is self-acceptance, and self-honesty. You have a right to all power if you seek it in infinity, and if you never hold the thought that it resides in your little self. So please affirm with me, repeating it several times, first in a loud voice, then in a normal speaking voice, then whispering, and finally mentally only. I live by thy power, Lord.
I live by thy power, Lord.
What I have is ever thine.
What I have is ever thine.
Ever thine.
Ever thine.
I live by thy power, Lord.
I live by thy power, Lord.
What I have is ever thine.
What I have is ever thine.
Ever thine.
Ever thine.
I live by thy power, Lord.
I live by thy power, Lord.
What I have is ever thine.
What I have is ever thine.
Ever thine.
Ever thine.
I live by thy power, Lord.
I live by thy power, Lord.
What I have is ever thine.
What I have is ever thine.
Ever thine.
Ever thine.
I live by thy power, Lord.
I live by thy power, Lord.
What I have is ever thine.
What I have is ever thine.
Ever thine.
Ever thine.
I live by thy power, Lord. What I have is ever thine. Ever thine. Mentally only. I live by thy power, Lord. What I have is ever thine. Ever thine. I live by thy power, Lord. What I have is ever thine. Ever thine. Please pray silently with me. Thou art the doer, Lord, not I. Express thy perfection through me as I strive ever eagerly to live in thy light. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
This is a celebratory day. I want to, first of all, ask the question, how many here were at the Yogananda Fest yesterday? I think that's just about everybody. And how many here help volunteer in some way or another? You sang in the choir. So thank you all. Thanks to the wonderful leadership here in Los Angeles that creates such beautiful, inspiring events for all of us to be a part of. So, kind of hard just to go back to Sunday service after all. But we must do what we must do. Okay, so our topic this week from Raise Up the One Line is how high should we aspire? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. The passage this week is from the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 5. I say unto you that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter the kingdom of heaven. The easiest explanation for these words is that they were spoken in criticism of the scribes and Pharisees, particularly since Jesus was often verbally attacked by them and stood up to them fearlessly. However, it wouldn't have been much of a challenge to the disciples who aspired to spiritual perfection to tell them, don't be like those who lack any such aspiration. Jesus, in fact, says only a few verses later, be therefore perfect, even as your Father, which is in heaven, is perfect. What Jesus was referring to here then was the self-righteousness of the priests. Don't seek perfection, he was saying to the disciples, in the image you project toward others. Don't be satisfied with a goodness born merely of ego definitions. The highest virtue is to transcend the very thought of personal virtue in the realization of God alone as the doer. Before this realization, even the thought, I am kind, or I am truthful, is self-limiting. As it says in the Bhagavad Gita, the 7th chapter, yet hard the wise Mahatma is to find, that man who saith, all is Vasudeva. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind.
Good morning, friends.
Good morning.
So I'm going to start with one of the whispers from eternity, the prayer demands. This is the prayer demand for removing the cork of ignorance. No more shall my consciousness remain bottled in this little vessel of flesh, corked with ignorance. No more will I remain moving through the sea of cosmic consciousness, night and day, years, decades, and how many incarnations, so close, yet never able to contact thy seed. Through the bursting vibration of cosmic sound and the surging of thy holy name, I have removed the cork of ignorance which so long separated me from thee, though we lived so closely together. Now my body consciousness will meet thy all-surrounding, all-pervading consciousness. No longer will I walk heedlessly in thee, but never knowing and feeling thee. Thine image within me shall meet thine image everywhere. By releasing the I-ness in me, I will know that I am thou, and that thou alone art the little egos of us all. Isn't that beautiful? We could just end there. But I know that wouldn't satisfy. So Devi and I have told this story from time to time, but some of you haven't heard any of it, and probably very few have heard all of it. This is a story about the spiritual path and the ego. We were with Swami Ananda in India one morning, and to preface it, it wasn't just a random conversation. He had said to many of us in Ananda, and this applies also to you, that we should aspire in this life to become Jivan Muktas. Now, what is a Jivan Mukta? A Jivan Mukta is someone who in this life has realized that their actual nature is not the ego. Master called the ego the soul identified with the body and personality. Swami called the ego a bundle of self-definitions that separate us. And so to give an image of this, every night when we dream, we end up with a dream that has a character in it. And that character, it has a certain bundle of self-definitions in it. And the whole dream is contained within itself. If we were in that dream world, we wouldn't see outside the bubble of that dream world. Last night I was on the moon. And lo and behold, there were moon people on the moon, and moon structures. And so within the bubble of that dream, we can laugh now, but I wasn't laughing in the middle of the dream. It seemed quite real, quite obvious that this is the way that it should be. So within that dream, there is a time and a space and a containment of its own little world. And within that dream, there is one character that represents I, or me. And that character has certain qualities to it. Now, if we stay inside the bubble of the dream, let's call that dream the ego for our daily personality. There are levels and levels here, but we'll get to that. So that dream character is the character created by this level of our personality. But it doesn't contain all of the personality. That dream character had no knowledge as the character that a few hours earlier, the person creating that character had been at the Yogananda fest. It had no knowledge really of past, of all those experiences, and yet it was somehow made up of this substance of the consciousness that had attended all of those things. So if you move up one level, that's our soul. We're in a dream bubble in this world. We don't remember what we were doing yesterday in our last incarnation, or last week, 7 incarnations ago. And yet, the soul brings those qualities and implants them into this life, and yet, because the bubble of this life is such that it's self-contained, we don't think that we're anything more than that. Now, the difference between an incarnation, the soul coming into this egoic body temple, and a dream at night is, if we stayed in the dream, we wouldn't realize that there was anything else going on. And so in this particular dream, we just haven't gotten woken up yet. And therefore we're still in the bubble. And we won't wake up until the life force passes out of this body. And then we'll wake up in heaven or in hell. Or there isn't really a heaven or hell. There's a spectrum in the astral world of darker vibration and higher vibration. So we'll wake up in the exactly appropriate vibration, and maybe we'll laugh, we'll be with our friends, those who passed on before. Master said for those who stay dedicated on the spiritual path, he or one of the other masters will meet us when we make that transition. So maybe we'll be with them, maybe we'll be with Swami, maybe we'll be with the Swami and the Ananda family that we've known, which is probably what we've been doing lifetime after lifetime in between the time we're dreaming of having an incarnation. Anyway, to finish that whole analogy, so the ego is that dream character that we're now inhabiting. And so coming back, Swami said that we should all aspire to be Jivan Muktas in this lifetime, which is to realize, to have full realization, not just intellectual, but full realization that this body and personality, number one, is not who we really are. We're the soul. And secondly, that the soul isn't even who we really are. That the soul is just a spark of the infinite consciousness of God. And so a Jivan Mukta has broken the hypnotism of the ego. So, now coming back to the story that I started out to tell. See, there are layers in my So, we were sitting with Swami some years after he had told us that we should try to be Jivan Muktas. And he was having breakfast in India. And so we said, you know, Swami, I know you told us that we should be Jivan Muktas, but it's really difficult I don't know, it's just a hard thing to do. And we were whining a little bit, kind of spiritualized whining. And so he was eating, and he had a fork full of food, and he paused midway, and he gave the whole summation of the spiritual path. He said the whole purpose of the spiritual path is to break the hypnotism of the ego, or I think he said dissolve the ego. That is done by longer, deeper meditation and the realization that God is the doer in everything. And then finished his fight. That was the end of that conversation. So subsequent to that, Devi and I were talking still, and she said, it still seems like a leap, that whether we can make it. So I said to her, you'd better assume that you can become a Jivan Mukta, and then have plan B. And that's good advice for us all. Rather than saying, oh, I can't do that. Assume that we're going to do it, and have plan B. And so the end of the story is that we were giving Sunday service in Seattle at the time. And Devi told the story up to the point where, that you'd better have the assumption that you're going to become a Jivan Mukta, and then have plan B. And then she went on and used that analogy to talk about how we should really strive to have longer, deeper meditations. We should strive to see God as the doer through everything that we do, and so on. So she finished her talk, and I got up, and big congregation, I said, not everyone here may know who I am. I'm plan B. And so it's true and it's not true. Plan B is already planned out for us, in that if we don't make it, we get to reincarnate, because there's still something that we haven't yet worked out, and therefore we need to keep working. It's not like, please understand this, it's not like we have to perfect the ego. We don't have to keep reincarnating until we're the most intelligent person on earth. We don't have to keep reincarnating until we're the best athlete who's ever been. But all of those things are like a video game character that you create. You don't have to keep working until that character is perfect. You have to work, you have to keep reincarnating until there's a sense of agonizing monotony of playing the role in that character, and you say, I'm done with it. I really am done with it. And then, when you're really done with it, then you have no veils or no pulls or desires to pull you back into playing the game again. So we don't have to perfect the ego. We have to perfect the desire for unity with our own true self and our unity with God. And then at that point, then the delusion begins to get fuzzy, and then it eventually dissolves. It is extremely helpful to have in this process the help and the blessings of a line of gurus, a guru such as we have, and the support of others. There was a time, all of you know, that Master used to travel throughout the country. And please, we mentioned last night that Phil Goldberg has written this book, a biography of Yogananda. If you don't have that, do get it, because you begin to see the scope of what Master actually did. So he didn't just kind of come into town, give a talk, have 5,000 people there, and then move on. He would come to a town, and he would be there for 6 weeks, and he would give classes every night of the week. Sometimes he would give classes in the afternoon and classes at night. He would give talks, he would meet with people, he would train people, he would give a whole series of training to people. So it might be 6 weeks, and then he would end up giving Kriya initiations. And so he was really, really working with people and instilling the ether. So this took place in Minneapolis. There was a man who at first went to the classes kind of out of curiosity. He was not really spiritual, and he was somewhat skeptical. But having kind of gone to the lecture and taken the first class series, he grew more and more deeply inspired by and interested in what Master had to share. So he began practicing, the techniques that we've all learned, because what we have is an extension of those 6-week classes that Master gave. And so he went through that. At one point, Master said, those of you who have been practicing diligently and who have been meditating, I'll give a special class where I'll help you see the spiritual eye. And so those who were qualified, ready for that, gathered together in a small group. And Master said, I don't want any one of you to say falsely, but I want, when I come to you, I'm going to give you a blessing. When I come to you, if you actually see the spiritual eye, then I want you to say so the rest of the group can hear it. And so he did that. And when he came to this man, he gave him the blessing. And the man said, I don't see it. And so then Master did it again. Man said, I don't see anything. And Master did it again, a third time, longer, and the man felt a wave of blessing going into him. And then he saw very definitely a light at the spiritual eye. And he said, yes, I see it. And then Master moved on to the next one. Well, that's not the end of the story yet, because this man had an intense desire to know what heaven was like. And so he knew from the teachings that if you could penetrate through your consciousness, penetrate through that spiritual eye, you would go into the astral world. And so the heaven is the astral world. But that also represents the removal of the life force from the body and the personality. And so for that little period of time, at least, he came back to the body consciousness, but for that little period of time, he was outside of egoic consciousness. But he couldn't hold on to that experience after Master left, but he kept trying and trying and trying. And then finally, he was able to see by long, deep meditation a little light. And then that light grew stronger and stronger until he could see a very powerful light in the center of it. But then he would lose that, and then he would have periods when he meditated and he couldn't get that back. But finally, at one point, that grew strong enough so that that light became all-encompassing, and he went through that and saw the astral world, beautiful, subtle colors, and what his heart had been longing for. Now, I say that because the power of Master wasn't lost back there in Minneapolis in whatever it was, 1932. I don't know when it took place. That power of Master is not limited by the delusion that he was the body and personality. He's omnipresent. He's here right now. He's within each of us right now. And we too can call on that power. But if you call on it because you wanted a good experience, or you call on it because you want to be able to tell others, look what I did, then it's all self-defeating, because you call on that power because you want to dissolve the sense of who you are. That's why humility is such an important part of that. And so all of us, we need to develop the deep, sincere desire to be reunited, to be out of the ego, to become what we already are, to have the veil removed so that we realize deeply who we already are. And as that desire grows more potent, and as we add to it our commitment to do what it takes to release our grip on the ego, then God and the experience of being a Jivan Mukta will come to us, and we can throw away Plan B.
Well, I don't like to contradict Jyotish in public.
I'm not sure.
I don't say I don't do it. But I have to say, he is not Plan B. He is an essential part of Plan A. That's the truth. So, this is actually such a beautiful topic. We have this whole spectrum. I'm referring back now to the reading, where it starts, where Jesus says, don't be like the Pharisees. And then what Swami points out, what's the essential thing there? Self-righteousness. Meaning, look how spiritual we are. And there's this whole beautiful spectrum on the spiritual path. And self-righteousness, I guess it's an early stage of spirituality, but very crude, very early. And, you know, there's the beautiful saying from, I believe, St. John of the Cross, if you desire to have everything, then desire to have nothing. If you desire to know everything, desire to know nothing. If you desire to be everything, desire to be nothing. And I remember some years ago, we had the great blessing of going to a very sacred place in Italy, San Giovanni Rotondo, which is where Padre Pio, the great saint of modern times, he died, I believe, in 1960, something like that. But many, many miracles associated with his life, really a true bona fide saint. And we had been reading a lot of books about his life before we got there. And one was written by a man who had been his personal assistant for many years, and had just witnessed and was so blessed by the life of this great saint, Padre Pio. And then we got to the San Giovanni Rotondo. It's a small city on the Adriatic eastern coast of Italy, very remote, not much around it, and it's really all focused on the church there that Padre Pio and a hospital that he built. And so we were meditating in different places in the church, and then the Basilica complex, and then we went into the little bookstore to see if there were any books we could buy or presents we could get for others. And there was a little old monk kind of helping sell the books, and very quiet, very inward. And I looked at him and I thought, he's the guy that wrote the book. But he just wasn't talking much. He's okay, selling bookmarks and medals and, you know, everything they do in church bookstores. And then finally I couldn't help it. I held up the book. I said, because there was a picture, is that you? Identify with that at all, and I'll never forget that. I doubt that he's alive anymore because he was elderly at the time. But it was such a beautiful living example of someone who understands what's important. Not, oh yes, I wrote a book about, you know, that I was with him. You know, it just was like, I'm nothing. I'm really nothing. And Swami in the reading or the affirmation was such a beautiful coalescence of what the topic, because he talks, okay, first you have self-righteousness. We're important. You know, we're spiritual. Look at us. We studied the scriptures. But then you start moving away from that. And then you come, in humility, you come to self-honesty. You can say, well, okay, maybe I look that way to everybody else, but I know my thoughts. I know when I get angry. I know when I lose my temper, whatever it might be. And we think, okay, I'm not a terrible person, but I have really nothing to be proud of. I just am what I am. So then you move from self-righteous to self-honest. And then from self-honest, you can go a little bit farther. Self-acceptance. Okay, I see my strengths and my weaknesses, but I know I love God. And I know I'm sincere in my search for God. That's a very important step. Really, that's the launch pad for all of spiritual growth. Self-honesty and self-acceptance. And then you just stand there and you say, I want this. I really do want it. Maybe I'm not worthy. Maybe I've made so many mistakes. But I want this. And then you move past even that. And that's the state that you see in so many of the saints. Self-forgetfulness. For what you are or what you aren't really isn't that important. What is important is that God loves us, and that God is, and that all the world is a reflection of God's love. Two of our dear friends from the Seattle El Camino Gardens are here, Zach and Haley, and they have, I hope you all can go visit the gardens they create, and Stanley also is part of it. And I believe that's true. But you go and you see how every plant is love. Every plant is expressing love. And so you just begin realizing, whatever I am or I am not, it's just not that important. But what is important is that God's love is everywhere. And you just forget yourself. That was the song, Father, a beautiful song from St. Francis, Father, now that I wander with thee, flowers and fields, are alive with thy joy. Yeah. Now that I wander with thee, now that I'm totally forgetful of myself, I see God everywhere. And it's not that hard to get to that point. Really, it's not. You just have to be honest and say, what's the big thrill about thinking of myself all the time? Whatever I am, if I'm great, if I'm terrible, what difference does it make? It's boring ultimately just to think about yourself. It's just not, we're not that interesting. But to think about God is interesting. It's always interesting. It's ever new. It's beautiful. And so one of the things that's important for us all to realize that the final step in this spectrum of self-righteousness and self-honesty, self-acceptance, self-forgetfulness, it isn't a big jump from self-forgetfulness to self-realization. Once you forget yourself, the little self, then it's not that far to realize the big self. Who is the big self? That immensely creative, joyful, very eternally present consciousness of God. And you know, Matt, the saying that is painted on the wall and it's over the entryway of Hamsa Temple at the village, the time for knowing God has come. Master didn't come just to kind of do lectures and start an organization. Master came to awaken us in God. And he, remember, it says in autobiography, when he was in the Ranchi school, and he said he saw this spectrum of faces, and he hadn't even ever seen a Westerner. And he said, Americans, surely these are Americans. And he said, the call of potential saints, the yearning and longing for God of the potential saints in the West called me. And that day he had that vision, in the morning, in the afternoon, that day, He tied up his affairs at Ranchi school, came back to Calcutta, told his father, I'm going to America that day. That's say yes and make it snap. And that began his 32-year mission in the West. But he came because he saw we could do this. He wouldn't have wasted his time otherwise. He saw there are people there who can find God. And I just want to close by saying, in the spectrum, self-righteous, honest, accept, forget, realize, remember, we're not that far. You are not that far. Just keep at it. And Master will take that. Just when you think, I don't know if I'm getting anywhere, I've been doing this a long time, you feel that hand reach out and say, come. We will take these last steps together. And we are all at that stage. Just reach out and say, I want this. Whether I deserve it or not, whether I'm worthy or not, whether other people think I am or not, none of that matters. All that matters is how much you want it, how much you want to find the joy and the love of God. And He's there for you. Just come. It's not that far to go. So let's encourage each other and support each other and remind each other why we're here. And the grace of our great Master who will bring us to where we want to go.
Long I've called you, my Lord. Long I've called you. Many years I have longed for your sign. Bathe the darkness with tears of devotion. Offer candles in prayer to your light. How much longer, friend, must I cry your name? I am yours, ever yours. Will you come? Long I've called you, my Lord. Long I've called you. Many years I have longed for your